Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, as I traveled all over Oklahoma during the state work weeks in March, I heard the concerns over and over from families in my state about terrorism. I talked with a gentleman in Colgate, Oklahoma, that absolutely could not understand how the United States could release $1 billion to Iran the same month that rural hospitals across our state and across America were facing new cuts from CMS and new criteria there. That $1 billion that was sent by the United States to Iran could have bailed out every single rural hospital in America. I talked to a mom in Lawton that did not understand why there was a conversation in D.C. about closing the Guantanamo Bay detention facility and bringing those individuals into the United States. I talked to a dad in Tulsa that is a dad of a soldier that wanted to know what's happening with terrorism and what's America's response. I talked to an Oklahoma business owner who was very, very concerned about cybersecurity and the threat of foreign governments attacking his network and other networks and businesses around the country. As the tales come out about what happened in Brussels and that terrorist attack, every American has in mind their security and their family. I continue to pray for the victims of those awful attacks and work to determine the best way our great nation can confront this threat. As the only member of this body that serves in both the Homeland Security Committee and the Intelligence Committee, I have the privilege to ensure that Oklahomans and Americans have a strong voice in the discussion over our nation's national security priorities. There's no simple solution, though, and there's no single method to confront terrorism. But we must be absolutely clear that terrorists will find no quarter in the land of the free and the home of the brave. As a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, I walk behind a heavy door several times a week to hear the sobering details about foreign threats and the amazing work that Americans do to confront them. I wish we could talk about all those things here because I believe Americans would be very proud of the work that's going on. We could talk about disrupted terrorist plots and insight into adversaries' plans that allows us to adjust and to prepare and to confront those terrorists before they bring the fight here. There are hard questions behind those closed doors. Oversight should be expected, and open discussion should be expected. But let me say today how incredibly grateful I am for the people in the intelligence community that work hard every single day. Members of our military and members of law enforcement around the country wear uniforms, and we get a chance to say thank you to them personally when we see them. But members of the intelligence community are patriotic Americans that are working to protect their families and our families every day that we don't get to say thank you to because we don't know who they are. But let me say from our country, thank you to them today. Right now, members of radical Islamic groups around the world are calling out on social media through encrypted messages and public forums around the world for the small minority of Muslims who believe like they do and believe in their hate-filled doomsday mission. They tell people that if they believe like they do, they should kill like they do. ISIS is enraged by our views about free speech, freedom of religion, girls attending school, equal pay, equal opportunity, and even voting in elections. It's almost impossible for Americans to imagine their hatred for the modern world and for freedom and basic human rights. So how do you win against an enemy like that? You confront them is how you do it, not ignore them. You deal with their ideology that spreads like a cancer around social media platforms around the world. Some people say poverty and lack of education creates radicalism. Well, I would tell you there are billions of people in the world that live in poverty. Most of them do not practice this particular form of radical Islam. The shooters in San Bernardino, California weren't in poverty or lacking education. The killers in Paris and Brussels were not isolated and poor. While undoubtedly refugees and isolated communities in poverty are breeding grounds for anger and frustration, but that is not the primary cause of terrorism. There are millions of people living as refugees in the world right now that are not extremists, they're not terrorists, they just want peace so they can go home and have a normal life again. We do have a moral and national security obligation to help the vulnerable when we can. The refugee crisis is immense, and it's affecting millions worldwide. Many countries are at the brink, and we need to stay engaged. But America has already given billions of dollars in aid. No country has done more for the refugees than the United States. Our logistics, our support, our financial aid has sustained most of the refugee communities there, either through direct aid or what we're doing through the United Nations right now. But the people living as refugees need access to education and training so that their children will grow up with skills and opportunity. We can help them have a second chance, but that's not the primary source. We need to engage with religious leaders around the world. We cannot and we will not define faith for them, but we can challenge any faith that promotes the death of people because of those individuals' race, their belief, or their gender. We should work to shut off terrorist financing around the world, their illegal energy trade, their drug trafficking, their extortions, and persons in wealthy countries who send money with the implicit promise that those terrorists will not bring terrorism to their country if only they'll send them money to do terrorism in other places. We must also fight and confront those individuals militarily. We must learn the lesson of 9/11. They're not just a group of radical thugs over there that we can ignore. They hate us, and they will find every way possible to attack us here and to attack our allies. No one wants war, but we cannot stand by and watch terrorists beheading Egyptian Christians on the beaches of Libya, killing Shia Muslims because of their faith in Iraq, blowing themselves up in an airport in Brussels, shooting people in a rock concert or in a synagogue in Paris, or just people enjoying a party at work in California. We can't put our head in the sand and ignore what's really happening and assume it will just go away if we just do nothing. As long as they hold territory, they call out to people worldwide to come join them in their caliphate, to come fight for them or to fight where they are. We're Americans. We lose track of that at times, I'm afraid. No one in the world has the same logistical capability as the United States of America. No one in the world has the most moral, most powerful military in the world like the United States of America. No one has our intelligence capability. No one in the world has our tactical planning capability. So the whole world is waiting on America to decide what we're going to do so they can decide if they're going to join us in this fight against this radical Islamic terrorism. It's not about massive troops on the ground. It's about a clear plan and a clear strategy to carry it out. It's why the Russians currently look more mobile and more capable than us all of a sudden. So the now what question rises large in this body. Well, number one, there are multiple proposals in state and foreign operations for how we can engage in peaceful activities, helping refugees, helping those in poverty, helping bring education to places, helping engage diplomatically with religious leaders around the world and with other countries to deal with terrorist financing. Those are things we could and should do more aggressively. Number two, the National Defense Authorization is coming. It's coming soon. We need to give great military clarity, not only rules of engagement in the battlefield, but what is the clear purpose militarily for the United States in this battle against radical Islam. Number three is tougher for this nation, apparently. It is to believe and understand that Iran is one of the key areas in this fight. I believe this administration's been too eager to believe good news about Iran and is ignoring the concerns that many of us hold. I've stood here several times in the past year to speak out against the president's reckless nuclear deal with the Iranian Ayatollah. I didn't like it then, I still don't like it, and I still don't believe Iran can be trusted to be able to carry out its end of the bargain. I recently authored a resolution that clearly outlines to the administration how the United States should respond if Iran, and I believe when Iran, breaches the nuclear agreement. We should reapply waive sanctions and UN Security Council resolutions and limit Iran's ability to import defensive equipment so they can stop fortifying their nuclear capabilities over the next 10 years. And when all the enrichment limitations are lifted, they'll be well prepared to defend those facilities they've now created. As I've said many times, until Iran proves it is a peaceful, responsible player in the Middle East, the international community must be vigilant in pushing back against Iran's harmful and destructive influence among its neighbors. Last week, I spoke with Adam Zubin, Acting Undersecretary of the Treasury's Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, and he communicated to me exactly what everyone already knows and fears, that Iran has become even more of a destabilizing factor in the region after the nuclear deal was signed. This is clearly evident in Iran's continued and unabashed support for terrorism and terrorist organizations like Hezbollah. They're propping up the Assad regime in Syria, a government which continues to blow up its own people and butcher its own people. and Iran's shipments of weapons to rebels in Yemen to be able to fuel their civil war there right on Saudi Arabia's southern border. We haven't even discussed Iran's testing of ballistic missiles in direct violation of international law. If Iran can't be trusted to uphold the law now, how can it be trusted to be able to uphold some agreement which it hasn't even signed? That is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Congressionally imposed sanctions on Iran is what brought the Ayatollah to the negotiating table. And let's be honest about this. Regardless of what some people may say about the momentum and the reformist inside of Iran, Iran's foreign policy, especially in dealing with the United States, runs through the Ayatollah Khomeini. And he has made it crystal clear that his regime is built on radical Islamic view, and this particular view of Shia Islam, that though it is opposed to ISIS, is supportive of spreading their views around the world. And it is absolutely anti-American. It's essential that the Treasury continue to completely shut down Iran's access to the U.S. dollar. And it is essential that Treasury rigorously enforce the still standing human rights and terrorism-related sanctions on Iran. So I spoke with D&I Clapper in this administration just a few weeks ago. Jim Clapper, when I asked the Director of National Intelligence, has there been any change in Iran's focus on being the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world? This administration's Director of National Intelligence said there's been no change in Iran's behavior since the nuclear deal was signed in relation to terrorism. We should not release known terrorists or bring them to U.S. soil. I can't believe I have to even raise this as an issue in this nation. We should keep Guantanamo Bay, what is known as Gitmo, that detention facility, open and operational rather than releasing known terrorists back into the battlefield or bringing them to the United States. In this era of growing threats, why would we irresponsibly release these individuals? Senator Kirk and I, along with 4 other members of this body, introduced a bill last week to prohibit the president from transferring terrorists detained in Guantanamo Bay to any other state where they may go and actually sponsor terrorism. It's not a hard decision. It's common sense. Our bill is very clear. If those individuals are transferred out of Guantanamo to some other state and then they later commit some act of terrorism, that state's foreign aid is cut off. The expectation is if these individuals go to that location is going to actually monitor them. Now, Americans assume that at this point, but it's not happening. Senator Inhofe and I will introduce a bill later today which prohibits the transfer of the United States to the United States of any of these detainees or the release of any terrorists held in Guantanamo Bay. It also goes farther than what we do with Senator Kirk's bill, and that is actually prohibits the president from closing the facility entirely. The president should not risk our nation's national security just to fulfill some campaign promise that makes absolutely no sense and puts our nation at risk. The executive branch occasionally laments congressional engagement in foreign policy, but this is the way the American people speak out, because the people in Oklahoma are absolutely concerned about what's happening in national security, and they want this administration to hear it loud and clear. There seems to be no clear plan, and the plans that are clear seem to weaken our resolve on national security. So today, I simply ask my colleagues to join me in doing what the people that we represent sent us here to do. Assume the mantle of responsibility as leaders, that we are not afraid to work with this administration or any administration and take responsibility for setting the nation's national security agenda. It must be done. It can't be done just militarily, but it must be done in a broad method of reaching out not only strategically through our State Department and diplomatically, but also militarily with a clear focus to make sure that we protect the nation, don't release terrorists, and actually do what we are supposed to do, guard this nation's security. With that, Mr. President, I yield back.